In the future world, girls aren't allowed to have just one boyfriend. In fact, they're not allowed to have a steady partner at all. They're required to constantly switch partners. This girl had gone on a few extra dates with the same boy and was immediately summoned by Bernard for a conversation. That's because this world follows 3 core rules: no privacy, no marriage, and no monogamy. Everyone here believes they're happy, and relationships between men and women are purely for the purpose of pleasure, not for love, marriage, or reproduction. People no longer get pregnant. Humans are mass-produced on assembly lines, with scientists modifying genes to create different types of people based on need. Humans are divided into 5 castes: alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and epsilon. At the top are the alphas, who handle leadership and management. Betas are responsible for research and technical roles. At the very bottom are the epsilons, who are nearly mindless and exist only to do hard labor. So, dating is allowed but feelings are forbidden. That's because in this so-called ideal world, everything is predetermined and strictly controlled. There's no escaping the system. There's no such thing as privacy here. Once this contact lens-like device is implanted into the eye, your every move is monitored. So it didn't take long for the system to notice the girl's unusual attachment to one partner. Watching as Bernard replayed every scene of her dates on screen, Lenina felt embarrassed. Bernard told her that her behavior was abnormal, but Lenina didn't think so. Seeing her reaction, Bernard bluntly told her that this kind of behavior was selfish. She couldn't monopolize someone just because he was an alpha. It wasn't fair to the others. Bernard reminded her that she was merely a beta. Lenina quickly corrected him. She was a beta plus. In the end, Lenina had to compromise, and Bernard handed her a pill as a reward. It was their miracle drug called Soma. Taking it would bring instant and long-lasting happiness. Different colors of Soma represented different effects and were distributed according to one's caste. After Lenina left, Bernard stared at her expression on the replay. There was something in her face he couldn't quite read. It wasn't until later events unfolded that he realized a crisis was quietly brewing. An epsilon had jumped to his death for no apparent reason. When Bernard rushed to the scene, he found a group of epsilons standing around. Judging from their blank expressions, they had no idea what had just happened. Bernard ordered everyone to leave. Everyone complied except one man, who stood there dazed. Bernard handed him a Soma pill. Then, turning over the corpse, Bernard was shocked by the gruesome injuries. It was the first time he had seen something so bloody, and it sparked his curiosity. He placed his hand on the epsilon's forehead, and a flood of strange images surged into his mind. The images were so overwhelming, he fell to the ground in terror. He immediately reported the incident to his superior, suggesting that some form of deep pain had driven the epsilon to suicide. But the superior was dismissive, saying there was no pain that Soma couldn't fix. If one pill doesn't work, he said, take 2. Bernard became anxious and tried to explain what he had seen, but his superior insisted he was simply overthinking it. He reminded Bernard that epsilons didn't have complex emotions. Then he offered to schedule Bernard a relaxing night at the pleasure park. This was New London, a futuristic world where men had to switch girlfriends daily. No one got married, and no one had children. Children were manufactured in labs, while citizens only had to focus on enjoyment. At a party in Pleasure Park, people were indulging in physical pleasure, but there was one man who clearly didn't fit in. Even when women approached him, he couldn't feel any attraction. Eventually, he ran away. His name was Bernard, a minor administrator, but technically a top-tier alpha plus. Lately, though, he'd been struggling with insomnia. He stood before the mirror and removed his contact lens, disconnecting himself from the central network. He wanted to be alone for a moment, but soon, he became nervous and quickly put the lens back on. His supervisor was calling. Through the lens, he could see a message next to his supervisor's image. He was also an alpha plus. The supervisor reprimanded Bernard for taking off his lens. Then, he hit him with a bigger issue. Bernard hadn't been dating anyone for a long time, which was extremely unusual. But that wasn't the worst part. The supervisor called Bernard outside and showed him a smashed grapefruit. It turned out Bernard had taken the fruit from the suicide scene to conduct an experiment. The problem was, Bernard had only been sent there to assess emotional damage, not investigate causes. Bernard's questionable actions made the supervisor doubt whether Bernard was truly an alpha plus. Panicked, Bernard immediately insisted that he was. The supervisor's tone softened. He suggested Bernard was simply under too much stress and arranged an exciting vacation for him to the Savage Lands. It turns out that, far across the planet, there were still groups of humans living like old-fashioned people. They got married, had kids, and built families. But now, all of that had been turned into a performance. staged for New Londoners who had never seen such things. It was like monkeys in a zoo, acting out domestic life for tourists. The name of this zoo was the Savage Lands, but before Bernard could leave, he had another issue to deal with. Earlier at the party, he had fled in panic and Lenina had seen it. Lenina had just been criticized by Bernard the day before for being too attached to one boyfriend. Now she saw the same man running away from women entirely. Wasn't that even stranger? But their conflict quickly turned into an alliance. It seemed they both understood each other's feelings. Not only that, Lenina came up with a plan to help Bernard. They would fabricate a fake dating scenario to trick the system. As a thank you, Bernard invited Lenina to join him on the trip to the Savage Lands. Only alphas had the privilege to go there, and as a beta, Lenina would never get this chance otherwise. A young man deeply loved a pregnant bride and waited for her after work every day. But in the next second, he helped her take off her fake belly. He was just an actor because in this world, there were people who had never seen a pregnant woman or a wedding. These were the people of New London living in a so-called utopia, and that's the scariest part of the entire series. In contrast, the primitive humans lived much harder lives, but at least they were real. John, the protagonist, had no parents and was raised by an alcoholic. He had to start working young to support his family, often suffering bullying. The actress he liked already had a boyfriend, and now John was staring down the barrel of that man's gun. Luckily, the boyfriend was also an actor and the gun was just a prop. Still, John got beaten up. To keep his job as a prop handler, he had to swallow his pride, but fate didn't let him off that easily. That night, the actress came looking for him, this time with a group of armed rebels. She was already part of their organization. They wanted John to join them by swapping blank bullets and a prop gun with real ones. They planned to create chaos during the next day's performance. Pointing to the sky, the rebel leader told John, "Why do they get to come and go freely beyond that barrier, while we're trapped here? Why do they live like gods while we suffer? We must change the world." Afterward, the actress walked John home, trying to convince him to join them. The next day, as John was helping her put on her costume, the male actor once again mocked him, saying someone like him could never get a girl like her. After he left, John, fuming, stared at the prop gun in his hands. Soon, the performance began. It was a wedding kidnapping scene, and the New London audience watched with fascination. Suddenly, the actor pulled the trigger and someone fell. Panic erupted. The rebels stormed the theater and began firing on the audience without hesitation. John stood frozen amid the chaos, horrified by the devastation. He never meant to cause so many deaths. Later, when he returned home and found two terrified New Londoners hiding, he rescued them without hesitation and brought them back to his house. His usually drunken mother sprang into action, quickly removing a bullet from the man and treating his wounds. Just then, the actress barged in and began searching the house. She suspected John had gotten soft and was hiding those two people. No matter how he tried to explain, she wouldn't listen. She even warned him that the rebel leader was on the way and would never forgive betrayal. That's when John finally realized she had been manipulating his feelings all along. He felt like a complete fool, just as he was filled with regret. The two hiding in the attic accidentally made a sound exposing everything, but in that critical moment, John's mother took decisive action and killed the actress from behind. John was stunned. He knew the rebels would never let them go now. John's mother remained calm and composed. She told John, "This is our best chance to escape." She also comforted the terrified and anxious Lenina, assuring her that not taking Soma wasn't a big deal. Lenina quickly realized that Linda was a Beta Plus, also from New London, and for some unknown reason, had been abandoned here, and Linda's intention in saving them became obvious after confirming that a man named Bernard was an Alpha Plus. She promised to help him escape. Bernard's goal was to help her cross the barrier and return to New London. Bernard agreed. They drove to the border, but John suddenly threw a tantrum. He had never wanted to leave this place, and even more so, he didn't want to become one of those emotionless, naive people in New London. Linda told her son, "You are from New London, your father was an Alpha Plus. You belong there." But John shouted back, "Going there is suicide." People turned to ash the moment they touched that wall. Linda quickly explained that as long as an Alpha Plus leads the way, it would be safe. Before she could finish convincing him, the armed rebels arrived. They had found the actress's body and were now hunting John down. All the way to the barrier, Bernard ran across first. A rebel who tried to grab Lenina touched the barrier and immediately disintegrated. John froze where he stood, unable to take a step forward. Behind him, the rebel leader raised her gun and took aim. In that critical moment, Linda shoved her son forward. In the end, both John and Lenina safely crossed the barrier. Clearly, John was no ordinary person. As the four of them were preparing to leave, the rebel leader called out to Bernard. Suddenly, on the aircraft, John noticed drops of blood floating in the air. It turned out that Linda had been shot. She finally made it back to the new London she had longed for, but at the cost of her life. And now, John, with his heightened senses and rich emotions, had arrived in New London like a massive rock thrown into still water. What kind of ripple would he create? By simply wearing the contact lens, one could see a number next to every person, alpha, beta, all the way down to epsilon, with epsilon being the lowest. A woman was explaining to John the many benefits of the contact lens. It connects to the central network Indra, which links everyone together. You can see what others see, and they can see what you see. That's how you become a new London citizen, she said. But John remained silent. He knew that if he wore it, he would no longer be himself. Just then, the man who had customized the lens for him arrived. He brought out a device and scanned John's eyes. The results left him speechless. Just one day ago, John was a so-called savage from the other side of Earth, but he had crossed the barrier meant only for New Londoners. Anyone else would have been obliterated by a mere touch, yet John survived. No one understood why except maybe John. The scan revealed something incredible. John's genes exceeded even those of the highest-ranking Alpha Plus. Bernard, who was standing nearby, couldn't help but feel a surge of envy even though he himself was an Alpha Plus. The technician soon returned with the custom lens, ready to put it on John, but John violently knocked the lens away, grabbed the scanning device, and nearly blinded the man with it. He then turned and bolted from the room, accidentally knocking over a work cart. Everyone around him stared in confusion. John fled quickly, but he had already become the center of attention. With no ID or digital profile, he sparked both curiosity and fear among New Londoners. Wandering aimlessly, John eventually stumbled upon a group who didn't even glance his way. They were epsilons, the lowest caste, simple-minded and expressionless. They did the dirtiest, hardest labor. They had no reaction to John's presence except for one. Jack 60 noticed him and gave him a small nod. Seeing that John cautiously sat down in front of him, Jack 60 handed over his own food. What no one knew was that Jack 60 was actually the biggest flaw in the entire New London system. Just then, everyone suddenly stood up in unison and walked away. Someone had entered. It was the Director of Stability, commonly known as the Director. Moments earlier, he had discovered John missing and was furious. He found Bernard and learned that Bernard had been bragging about his Savage Lands trip when John slipped away. Enraged, the Director scolded him. The more you brag, the more it reveals your inferiority complex. Maybe you're not really an Alpha Plus at all. And with that, he vanished, not giving Bernard any chance to explain. For some reason, the Director was unusually concerned about John. He opened the map, where countless energy points glowed, each color-coded to represent a different caste. He quickly located John because John's was the only one that glowed white. Then, shockingly, the Director removed his contact lens, an illegal act in New London. What was he planning to do? After clearing out the epsilons, the Director took John up a hillside. He told John, "What New London plans to do to you probably can't handle. You should just leave." A plane landed softly on the grass, but John refused to go back. He had many enemies there who would gladly kill him. The Director replied, "There's plenty of space there," and offered him a few safe options. But John's face suddenly changed.
You're warden of the Savage Lands?
It doesn't matter now.
It mattered to her.
So my mom, you remember Linda?
Get in.
She'd get drunk every night trying to bring you back. She waited for you for years.
The Director grew anxious. Having a single partner and fathering a child were absolute taboos in New London. If this got out, he would be finished. So he confessed, "Back in the Savage Lands, we fell in love. Then your mother got pregnant. We didn't even realize what was happening. Then you came along. She stayed behind for you. I returned alone." But John didn't believe a word. Suddenly, the Director reached for him. In their struggle, he slipped and fell off the cliff. John was frozen in shock. He never expected his first meeting with his father to end this way. Once he calmed down and saw no one was around, he quietly left the scene. Meanwhile, Bernard came looking for the Director to apologize, only to find out the Director had gone offline. What stood out even more was that the Director's pupil matched John's exactly. This was a human manufacturing line. The round shape in the middle was a cell, and the syringe injected the growth serum. From Alpha Plus all the way down to Epsilon, each level represented a different human class. But today, the operator had a sudden thought. What if we don't assign a caste and just let one develop naturally? Because Lenina had grown tired of a life where everything was prearranged. However, Her attempt triggered an alarm from the system, and the cell was recycled and reprocessed. It seemed that trying to change someone's fate was impossible, whether for herself or for someone else. But there was one exception. John wasn't just conceived naturally, he had grown up in the savage world outside. The people of New London called him the Savage. Whenever he said something out of the ordinary, people had to immediately take a soma pill to stabilize their emotions. Long-term drug use had turned New Londoners into emotionally fragile beings. How could they tolerate someone like John, who questioned everything they believed in? So, he was placed among children to be reconditioned. Meanwhile, Bernard repeatedly tried to convince John to wear the same kind of contact lens as everyone else. John refused and asked what good it would do. Bernard explained that the lenses allowed you to see everyone's caste level, but John stood up angrily and pointed at the crowd watching him. Reading people's faces is a basic skill. Knowing who's in charge and who's a worker should be obvious. John's presence had brought too many changes to this world. Take Gary, a gamma who served Alpha Pluses today. He shocked Bernard by saying, "This outfit doesn't look good." Normally, Gammas weren't allowed to express opinions, but this change was all thanks to John. And what did Bernard learn from John? How to fight. It started when Bernard reported to the Supreme Leader, the Controller, that John might be the son of the Director of Stability, but the Controller already knew. She told Bernard to keep quiet, hinting that he might choose Bernard as the next director. However, one day, Bernard ran into the person he liked least, Henry. During the introduction, Henry said something painfully insulting.
"My name's Henry. I'm the director of the Bureau of Stability."
In New London, emotional distress was usually treated with a simple soma pill, but John told Bernard, "Where I come from, the best way to deal with that is to punch him in the face." Bernard said he had never heard of that, but under John's constant goading, Bernard began practicing with clumsy punches. Eventually, he confronted Henry, and it felt amazing until he realized the crowd was cheering for John, not him. Indeed, New Londoners had a strange attitude toward John. At parties, people surrounded him, begging him to tell stories. John casually spoke about violence and undying love. To his surprise, everyone responded with wild enthusiasm, so he cast himself as the hero in his tales no matter how the story changed. The crowd cheered. The most popular story was about dueling for love. John started with one-on-one fights, then two-on-one, and eventually 8-on-1. People couldn't get enough. But John grew disgusted with these twisted people. New Londoners longed for the life of savages deep down, yet they still looked down on John, calling him a barbarian. That was, until he met the awakening Lenina, and sparks of love flew between them. Two completely different types of humans. What would love look like in this supposed utopia? What is it like to date a woman who's had countless sexual encounters but is falling in love for the very first time? Not just love, Lenina had zero experience with 90% of real-life things. Even an empty field made her gasp in amazement. When John described a simple life in a house of their own, working by day, resting by night, Lenina yearned for it from the bottom of her heart. Because before she met John, she had no concept of independence. In New London, everything about you belonged to everyone else, including your body and your mind. When Fanny asked about Lenina's trip, regulations said Lenina had to share everything. But that day, Lenina refused. Fanny didn't know how to respond and simply left her hanging. Furious, Fanny popped a soma pill. Her mood instantly lifted, and she even apologized. Clearly, these were people with no individuality, utterly dependent on drugs, and since her awakening, the first thing Lenina did was stop attending the nightly mega party. That quickly caught John's attention. One day, they met by chance in the subway station. John immediately noticed how different she was. He liked Lenina. He took her on an unauthorized train ride to a forbidden area. For the first time, Lenina saw a real outdoor meadow. She shrieked with joy. She told John she wasn't truly happy. She longed for the life in the savage lands, where she could do whatever she wanted. John told her, "You can do that now, there are no cameras here." But Lenina couldn't think of anything to do. So John covered her eyes and said, "Imagine this, we have a house here. I'm going fishing, and you're waiting at home." It sounded boring, but to Lenina, it was fascinating. Soon, she blindfolded John and created her own vision. They played this game until nightfall. Eventually, they embraced and kissed like a real couple in love. From that day on, they often returned to this place for dates. One day, Lenina gave John a gift: the headphones and music player that were confiscated when she arrived in New London. Music meant everything to John. He was overwhelmed, but they had to face a cruel reality. People in New London didn't belong to themselves. One day, John discovered that Lenina had gone back to the pleasure park party. To him, that felt like betrayal. He confronted her. She told him, "I'm a beta plus, I belong to any alpha, but not to myself." If I don't attend these parties for too long, Indra will notice and the consequences are serious. This was the first time John truly hated this world. But things only got worse. John had talked to Bernard about love. Now Bernard had set his sights on Lenina. Lenina was ordered to date him. Even though she already had a boyfriend, she couldn't say no because Bernard outranked her, so she had no choice but to get on the aircraft with him. Bernard brought up memories of their past trips together. They used to be close. But now Lenina had someone else. No one knew about it, though, because every time she wanted to avoid Indra, she'd remove her contact lens and go offline. As Bernard tried to confess his feelings, Lenina said, "It was that trip that made us friends." The word friends sucked all the joy from Bernard's face, and the mood turned awkward. Just when Lenina thought the date was over, Bernard brought her back to his place. He asked her to sit down and gently said, "This is the final stage of the date where we decide whether to begin a romantic relationship and whether it's worth investing in each other." Lenina instantly tensed up. Meanwhile, back at home, John grew anxious. Lenina still hadn't come. It was almost evening. Don't tell me she went to the mega party again, he thought. He rushed out to find her. Soon, he spotted a woman walking arm in arm with a man. He hurried over, grabbed them only to realize he had mistaken them for someone else. John was pacing like a cat on a hot tin roof. He went to the Epsilon rest area to be alone, only to have CJack60 approach him and strike up a conversation. Seeing John draw an emoji on his arm, CJack60 said he could feel that it represented sadness. That comment made John even sadder. He wanted to drown his sorrows in beer, but the Epsilon bartender, practically a robot, refused to serve him anything but Soma soda, repeating the same line like a broken record. Frustrated, John smashed the glass. Little did he know, that small act would nearly spark a revolution. John thought it was just another pointless gesture, but just as he was about to leave, CJack60 smashed his glass. Then a second did the same, then a third. Meanwhile, how was Lenina's date going? Lenina slowly stood up and began unbuttoning her clothes, but Bernard had already sensed her strong reluctance, and in that moment, his pride was deeply wounded. Bernard closed his eyes, overwhelmed by a sense of failure. He took out a bottle of Soma, shook out a few pills, but hesitated, ultimately choosing not to take them, by accident. Bernard later saw a portrait of Lenina in John's home. He pressed others for answers and found out that Lenina and John had been in a romantic relationship for a while. She came to his place every night. Bernard's expression twisted, his heart bled, and a dark idea began to take root. He told John that, following his advice, he'd started dating someone. Lenina had accepted his confession and agreed to remain in a committed relationship with him. John had always believed Bernard to be honest, so he took every word at face value. It was clear, human emotions were becoming more complicated, and so was the story. This was the first time this woman had cried in her life. She was the one who held the emotional codes of New London. She had orchestrated countless ecstasy-filled parties in Pleasure Park, but when she accessed John's memories, she broke down completely. She had never seen such a mix of love and hatred, especially the moment when John accidentally pushed his father off a cliff. Heartbroken, John couldn't stop obsessing. He didn't want to feel this way, so he went to Helm and agreed to wear the contact lenses, letting her copy all his memories. But even after the process, he still felt hollow. Sitting on a bench, John was startled when CJack60 appeared behind him. CJack60 told him, "We think what you said makes a lot of sense." John invited him to sit, but CJack60 hesitated. Those benches weren't meant for Epsilons. John insisted. Soon, more Epsilons gathered around them, leaving onlookers stunned. Unbeknownst to John, Bernard used this event to stir up trouble. He reported to the director, listing all the dangers John posed and demanded his exile. In other words, he wanted John banished from New London and left to die. But the newly appointed director seemed utterly deflated. He asked Bernard to remove his contact lens. What he was about to say shouldn't be heard by Indra. It turned out Henry had recently visited the controller and uncovered part of New London's dark truth. Indra was malfunctioning, and the controller's image was a virtual illusion. In reality, she was an old woman on the brink of death, with no ability to resolve the crisis. Henry also found the old director's plane abandoned on the lawn. He guessed the former director had tried to escape. Now, comparing it to his own current situation, Henry felt hopeless. After hearing all this, Bernard wandered away in a daze. Unwilling to believe it, he went to Helm, asking for access to John's memories. Bernard was still hellbent on destroying John. Helm knew the memories could cause a storm and flatly refused, but Bernard managed to steal them anyway. Soon, his face contorted with horror. he realized it was John who had caused the director's death. Bernard decided to expose him. At the same time, John was asking Lenina about her date, but Lenina didn't understand his probing questions. Her straightforward answers made John think she was shameless. They parted on bad terms, but when Lenina stepped outside, she saw John's killing broadcasted endlessly. To the people of New London who hadn't even seen a chicken get slaughtered, this was a massive shockwave. Lenina rushed to John's place and found Fanny there. Fanny was nearly hysterical. Lenina's behavior had upset her for a while now. She thought something was wrong with herself, but now she realized it was the influence of that savage murderer. Fanny had come to bring Lenina back to their way of life. Meanwhile, John had become a public enemy. A group of Epsilons surrounded him, and Bernard stepped out from among them. He faced John, but when he gave the order, the Epsilons didn't attack. Instead, they escorted John away. Bernard was furious but powerless. Elsewhere, Henry scolded an Epsilon for not sweeping up some leaves. The Epsilon ignored him. Henry chased after him. By the next day, Henry was dead. Bernard, by default, became the new director, finally achieving his dream. Overjoyed, he went to boast to Lenina, but Lenina was somber. In all of New London, she was the only one grieving Henry's death. The famous Universe 25 experiment, known as the Mouse Utopia, provided ideal conditions, perfect temperature, endless food, and space for 3,000 mice. But when the population reached 2,200, the mice stopped reproducing. They became aggressive and started killing each other, leading to total collapse. New London, humanity's version of Utopia, had two systems in place to avoid this fate. First, reproduction was entirely handled by artificial embryo production. Second, Soma kept everyone in a state of constant joy. But what if one day, there were no more embryos? And no more Soma? What would happen then? That day came. First, the embryo production line shut down, triggering instinctual panic. The reason? Indra had malfunctioned. This young woman Indra was God to the people of New London. At that moment, she was chatting with the controller. It's worth noting, Indra wasn't human, she was an AI program. The program was failing, leading some Epsilons to commit suicide and halting embryo supply. The controller was helpless. She couldn't persuade Indra. From Indra's godlike perspective, New London was nothing more than a model filled with lab mice, just like Universe 25. If it failed, she could simply start over. But now there was a new variable, John, the outsider. The Epsilons looked to John for guidance, yet John couldn't let go of Lenina. His grief consumed him. He couldn't escape the voice inside him calling out. Suddenly, he smashed a plate. The Epsilons swarmed around him. They were ready to move but didn't know how. They needed a leader. They looked to John, hoping he'd give the order, but John wanted to teach them through reason to awaken and fight for their rights. Just then, a discordant sound rang out, the clinking of a Soma bottle. John smashed the bottle and told them, "This is the root of your enslavement. Break free from Soma and you'll be free." One by one, they smashed their bottles. Then, John led them to destroy the Soma factory. Colorful Soma fluids sprayed everywhere, a sign that a new crisis had begun in New London. Poor Bernard had just become director and hadn't solved the embryo crisis. Now, the managers came asking why Soma wasn't being supplied. Bernard had no idea. He tried to calm them down, just wait a bit longer, but panic had already begun. People were looting Soma. New London had fallen into chaos. Bernard checked the monitors, emotional levels had spiked. He heard a sound. Turning around, he saw someone had already jumped to their death. Worse still, the Epsilons, going through Soma withdrawal, became violent. They started killing higher caste citizens. John was stunned. This wasn't what he wanted. Epsilons now wielded weapons. The unarmed elite couldn't defend themselves. Massacre broke out. Ironically, Lenina wasn't attacked by Epsilon, she was attacked by Fanny. Lenina's defiance and lack of remorse had driven Fanny mad. To preserve her own worldview, Fanny had to make Lenina disappear, but in the end, a shred of humanity stopped her. She forced herself to walk away. The controller arrived with another group of Epsilons. She quickly regained control. Jack 60 raised his blood-stained hands and asked the controller a question.
Why are we like this?
I need you.
She brought him to a hidden room. Inside were 5 people dressed in red. They had helped build this world alongside the controller. Their minds had shaped Indra. The reason the controller brought Jack 60 there was because he looked exactly like one of them. He was that person's clone. She wanted him to press the shutdown button to end Indra and bring New London to an end. Meanwhile, John finally found Lenina, but with bodies everywhere. She couldn't forgive him. John tried to explain the director's death was self-defense. The Epsilon uprising wasn't his doing. But in the end, Lenina chose to walk away. In the final scenes, Indra didn't disappear. She packed herself into a small box and planted her next plan inside Bernard's mind. Bernard, carrying the box, went to the Savage Lands to find the rebel leader. Lenina was chosen by the controller. She and Bernard built a new version of New London. Lenina naturally became its next controller. And John? Just as he described in their date, he had a house. He went fishing during the day, returned at sunset, and cooked dinner. A beautiful woman by his side, but there was only one set of plates and cutlery. Outside the window, vines crept over the ruins. The world was still barren, and this final image offered the perfect summary. Every utopia eventually becomes a dystopia. The ideal world is beautiful, but it exists only in dreams. The real world is harsh. Life is hard, and without that struggle, how can humanity move forward? I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.